Blood smeared the cracked pavement as the sirens wailed farther away, leaving behind only a battered dog standing guard over a ticking bomb and a broken man who could barely breathe. In that frozen instant, with smoke curling into the dawn and death counting down by the second, only one truth remained. The dog was not just a survivor, he was the only reason any of them might live to see another sunrise. You don't know his name yet. You don't know the weight he carries in every scar, every step, every desperate breath. But you will. Before this is over, you will know what it means for a soldier to lose everything and for a dog to bring him back from the edge. This is not a story about war, it's not about betrayal. It's about a loyalty so fierce it burned through betrayal, through guilt, through death itself, and it all started with a single, impossible choice. Stay with us, watch to the end. If this story shakes something loose inside you, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where are you watching from, and what moment hit you hardest. The night dripped like black ink over the battered rooftops of the small desert town. A brittle wind scraped dust along the cracked sidewalks, whispering secrets too heavy for anyone to bear. Ethan Cole sat slouched against the worn wood of the only bus stop for miles, his jacket pulled tight against a chill that went deeper than the skin. His hands, calloused and cracked, cradled a faded photograph of a little girl whose smile could have melted glaciers. Lily, his world, his only tether to this life. And she was slipping away. Across the street, under the flickering neon stipe of a pawn shop that had seen better decades, Rex lay curled at Ethan's boots. The German Shepherd, once the terror of enemy lines, now rested his grizzled head atop paws too scarred to ever forget what they'd done, where they'd been. Ethan glanced down, the corner of his mouth twitching in something almost like a smile. Almost. "I'm sorry, boy," he whispered into the void, the words barely carrying past his own throat. Rex's ears twitched, sensing the storm building behind those broken syllables. Once, Ethan Cole had been a name you spoke with reverence. Canine handler of the 7th Battalion. Decorations pinned to his chest like stars guiding the lost. There had been a time when men twice his size moved aside in respect or fear. Not anymore. War chewed through men like him, left nothing but husks too stubborn to collapse. After he came back, the world had no use for a man who only knew how to survive by his teeth and the sharpness of his instincts. And now, with Lily's life dangling by a thread, Ethan was about to betray the last creature who had never turned his back on him. A low rumble of an engine broke through the silence. A pickup truck, headlights punching through the darkness, slowed as it neared the pawn shop. Ethan stiffened. He hadn't called anyone yet. This wasn't the buyer. No, the buyer would come later tonight, a man he hadn't dared to look too closely at when arranging the deal. Desperation didn't bargain, it surrendered. Ethan stood, joints creaking like rusted hinges. Rex rose immediately, standing at attention without a command, because some instincts even time couldn't kill. Ethan fished into the pocket of his tattered jeans, pulling out the crumpled piece of paper, an address, a name, a price. Enough to cover the surgery, enough to buy a chance. Barely. He couldn't look at Rex as he shoved the paper back into his pocket. Couldn't face the betrayal that coiled like barbed wire around his guts. All he could do was move forward. One step, another, pretend it was another mission. Only the mission was to sever the last thread tying him to the man he once was. "Come on, boy," he murmured. Rex fell into step beside him, like he had done 1,000 times across 1,000 hustles. They crossed the road, the buzz of the neon growing louder, angrier. Inside the pawn shop, the air was a soup of metal, old leather, and forgotten things. A heavy-set man behind the counter didn't look up from his magazine. Ethan didn't need him to. He wasn't here to sell to him. The real business was happening behind the store, in the shadows where deals stank worse than rotting garbage. Ethan moved toward the back, pushing open a door that groaned in protest. The alley beyond reeked of oil and something sour despair. Rex hesitated at the threshold, nose wrinkling. Smart dog, too smart. Ethan knelt, ruffling the fur between Rex's ears. In what might have been affection, might have been an apology. "Stay close, buddy, just a little longer." His voice cracked and he hated it. A shuffling figure emerged from the darkness at the far end of the alley. Thin, angular, more shadow than man. Ethan's stomach knotted tighter. He had expected some slimy broker, maybe a desperate breeder. Not this. The man's face remained hidden beneath the brim of a tattered cap, his hands jammed into a heavy coat despite the desert heat. Without a word, he nodded at Ethan, then flicked his chin toward Rex. Payment for goods. Ethan's throat felt like it was packed with gravel. He forced himself to nod. This was for Lily. Everything was for Lily. He rose to his feet, unclipping Rex's leash with shaking fingers. Rex whined low in his throat, stepping back, confusion flickering in his deep brown eyes. Ethan wanted to scream, to grab the dog and run until the world dropped away, but there was no running from this. The man stepped forward. Something about his gait, the slight hitch in his left leg, snagged at Ethan's memory like a fishhook buried deep in flesh. But before he could tug the thought free, the man tossed a thick envelope at his feet. Money. Blood money. Ethan crouched stiffly, scooping up the envelope without counting. Pride was a luxury he couldn't afford. The man gave a sharp whistle, a sound that made Rex flinch. Rex never flinched. The dog pressed against Ethan's leg, tail tucked low. Ethan squeezed his eyes shut. "Go, Rex," he choked out. "It's okay, boy. Go." The German Shepherd hesitated, looking up at him with a betrayal so raw, so human, it carved a fresh wound across Ethan's battered heart. Then, because he was trained, because loyalty sometimes meant obedience even unto death, Rex padded slowly toward the stranger. Ethan turned his back before the man leashed him. He couldn't watch, couldn't bear it. As the footsteps retreated into the night, Ethan stood alone, an envelope of salvation clutched in his dirty hands and the empty echo of his own soul ringing in his ears. He looked up at the infinite desert sky, the stars smeared into oblivion by smog and sorrow. Somewhere out there, Lily slept fitfully in a sterile hospital bed, her fragile breaths counted by machines and whispered prayers. He had made the deal. He had bought her time. All it cost was everything he had left to love. The desert night pressed heavier on Ethan's shoulders as he stumbled down the cracked sidewalk, the envelope tucked tightly against his chest like a fragile life raft in a merciless sea. The neon lights from the pawnshop buzzed behind him, dimming into irrelevance as he walked away from the betrayal he had just committed. Every step pulled at the ragged edges of his soul. Every breath felt like broken glass scraping his lung. He could still feel the warmth of Rex's body against his leg, the subtle tremor in the dog's muscles when Ethan gave the final, unthinkable command. The image of Rex walking away obedient yet confused, stabbed deeper than any shrapnel wound ever had. Ethan turned the corner into a narrower alley, seeking darkness to hide in, needing to be invisible even to himself. The streetlights here barely functioned, casting crooked shadows that lurched and twisted as he passed. His mind replayed the last 48 hours like a broken film reel, every frame a fresh punch to the gut. He had tried everything, every door, every favor. Every ounce of pride he had left had been stripped bare as he begged on hands and knees for someone, anyone, to help him save his daughter. But no one wanted an old dog. No one wanted Rex. They saw the gray in his muzzle, the stiffness in his gait, the old scars crisscrossing his body like faded battle maps. They didn't see the hero who had pulled 3 wounded soldiers from an ambush in Kandahar. They didn't see the fearless protector who had once taken down a suicide bomber inches from a crowded market. They only saw liability, damage, age. Ethan had posted online in the veteran forums, driven to nearby towns, made desperate phone calls to contacts he hadn't spoken to in years. Every meeting ended the same way, a polite shake of the head, sometimes pity in their eyes, more often irritation, as if he had wasted their precious time. "Good dog," they would say, almost reflexively, as if offering crumbs of kindness could erase the rejection. But then came the questions. How old is he? Has he had hip surgery? Any behavioral issues? No one wanted a broken soldier, human or canine. It had crushed him, each refusal another weight on a drowning man. Until last night, until the call, the number had come from a blocked ID, the voice on the other end low and gravelly. "You're selling the K9?" the stranger asked without preamble. Ethan's heart had hammered in his chest. He forced himself to stay calm, to sound professional, detached. "Yes," he answered. "German Shepherd, former service dog, obedient, loyal." A pause, heavy and measured, filled the line. "I'll pay triple your asking price," the voice said finally. "Cash, no questions, tonight." Ethan's throat went dry. Triple? It was too good to be true. It screamed of danger, of strings he couldn't see yet but knew were there waiting to ensnare him. The stranger gave an address, a grimy alley behind the pawn shop Ethan now left behind, and hung up without another word. Ethan hadn't even had time to think, to question, just act, just survive. He reached the end of the alley now, the heavy metal of the hospital parking lot gate looming before him like the gates of some forgotten purgatory. Beyond it, under the harsh blue lights, Lily was sleeping on the 12th floor, her tiny frame wired to machines that hissed and beeped in mechanical sympathy. He leaned his forehead against the cold iron bars, the envelope crumpling in his desperate grip. It wasn't enough. The money was a start, but hospital bureaucracy bled you dry in ways that bullets never could. There would be more tests, more surgeries, medications. He would have to find more money, sell more of himself if he had to. His breath fogged against the gate. He let it out in a shuddering exhale. From somewhere deep in his chest, a sound escaped, a low, broken thing that was part sob, part snarl. No one cared about broken things. Not about broken soldiers. Not about broken dogs. They were expendable, disposable. But not Lily. Not his little girl. She wasn't broken. She was brilliant, brave. She deserved a chance, damn it. She deserved the world. Ethan shoved away from the gates, fists clenching so tightly his nails bit into his palms. He needed a plan, needed to keep moving. The stranger would come soon to confirm the deal, finalize whatever blood pact Ethan had unwittingly signed. The rusted door creaked open to his left. Instinctively, Ethan pressed himself against the wall, years of training snapping into place despite the weariness dragging at every fiber of his being. A figure stepped out, silhouetted by the sickly glow of a single hanging bulb. Not the buyer from before, someone else. Shorter, bulkier, moving with an unsettling confidence. Ethan tensed, his hand twitching toward the knife he still kept sheathed under his jacket out of habit. The man whistled low under his breath, looking around before his eyes settled on Ethan. "You the one selling the mutt?" he rasped. Ethan said nothing, his body screaming warning signals. The man stepped closer, pulling out a wad of cash so thick it made Ethan's stomach lurch. "Double whatever you were offered," he said with a sneer. "No paperwork, no questions." Ethan's mind raced. Double? In any other world he would have snatched it without thinking. But something about this man set his teeth on edge, made the animal part of his brain hiss danger. "You're interested," Ethan said hoarsely. The man's expression twisted, somewhere between confusion and rage. "You sure about that, soldier boy?" he sneered. "Old dog like that's only good for two things, fighting or dying. Might as well make some real money off it." Ethan's fists clenched involuntarily. His vision blurred red for a split second, but he swallowed it down. Lily needed him to stay smart, alive. He shook his head once, sharply. The man cursed under his breath and stalked off into the shadows, the stink of him lingering in the air like rotting meat. Ethan leaned back against the wall, his heart pounding painfully in his ears. One bad decision, one slip, that was all it would take to destroy what little hope he had left. Somewhere, a distant church bell struck midnight. The time had come. The real buyer would be here any second. Ethan wiped the sweat from his brow with a shaking hand and forced himself to stand straight. He would see this through. He had no choice. The faint crunch of gravel reached his ears. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Ethan didn't move. Didn't breathe. The darkness at the end of the alley thickened. A figure emerged, tall, lean, face hidden in shadow. In one gloved hand he carried a heavy leash. The other held a metal case, no doubt filled with even more money than before. Ethan's stomach twisted violently. Something about the way the man moved, too controlled, too precise, made every hair on the back of his neck stand on end. He realized too late that this wasn't just a buyer. This was something else entirely. The figure stepped closer, boots grinding softly against the gravel. The harsh fluorescent light above the alley door casting long, distorted shadows. Ethan stiffened, every muscle coiling tight as a spring ready to snap. He couldn't see the man's face yet, but there was something chillingly familiar about the way he moved, something buried deep in the marrow of Ethan's memory. The stranger stopped 3 feet away, just outside the reach of immediate danger. And for a moment, neither of them spoke. The night buzzed in Ethan's ears, the world narrowing to the pounding of his own heartbeat. The stranger reached up and pulled back the hood of his jacket. The streetlight caught the angular planes of his face, the sharp scar running from his temple to his jawline like a river carved in stone. Ethan's blood turned to ice. Victor Reyes. The name detonated in Ethan's mind like a landmine. Victor Reyes, former Black Talon commander, the man responsible for the ambush in Helmand that had wiped out half of Ethan's unit. The man who had pulled the trigger when Ethan had been pinned down behind a crumbling wall. The man who had missed by inches. Ethan's fists clenched so hard the envelope of money crinkled noisily in his pocket. His voice rasped out, hoarse and disbelieving. Victor. Victor smiled without humor, a slow curling of the lips that showed no teeth, no warmth. Good to see you're still breathing, Cole, he said, his voice smooth as oil but cold as a winter grave. Ethan took a half step back, instinct screaming at him to run, to fight, to do anything but stand there. Victor Reyes. Here, in this forgotten town, not a coincidence, never a coincidence. Ethan's hand inched toward the knife hidden under his jacket, but Victor merely raised one hand in a slow, lazy gesture of peace. Relax, he murmured. If I wanted you dead, you wouldn't have made it to this alley. Ethan didn't relax. Every nerve ending was lit up with electric suspicion. His mind raced through possibilities. This wasn't a simple transaction. This was something else. Something far worse. Victor seemed to read his thoughts. He tilted his head slightly, studying Ethan with the clinical detachment of a biologist examining a wounded animal. I hear you're in a bad way, he said. Kid's sick. Expensive treatment. No insurance. Ethan's jaw tightened. What the hell do you want? He spat. Victor chuckled softly, a sound without mirth. Straight to business. I always liked that about you. He crouched down, setting the heavy metal case carefully on the ground, then opened it with a click. Neat stacks of $100 bills filled the interior. More money than Ethan had seen in one place in his entire life. Victor let the sight sink in before continuing, his voice turning almost conversational. This is yours. No strings. Victor's smile widened a fraction, sharp as ever. He stood, dusting his hands casually. You hand over the dog, you walk away with the money. You get your little girl the surgery she needs. Everybody wins. Ethan's gaze flickered to Rex, who sat obediently beside Victor, his body tense, eyes darting between the two men. Even now, Rex sensed the wrongness in the air. Ethan's heart wrenched. It would have been so easy to just take the case, grab the money and run. But nothing about Victor Reyes was ever easy. And if I say no? Ethan asked, voice low and deadly. Victor shrugged. Then you walk away with nothing. And your daughter, well... He let the sentence trail off, the implication hanging heavy between them. Ethan's fists trembled with the effort of holding himself back. Victor stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Ethan could hear. But, he said softly, there's another way. Ethan said nothing, waiting. Victor's eyes glittered under the streetlight. A job, he said. One night, in and out, no mess, no blood. If you do it right. Ethan laughed bitterly under his breath. If you do it right, he repeated. And what if I don't? Victor smiled just. The threat wasn't even subtle. Ethan stared at the case of money, feeling the weight of his entire life crashing down on him. Victor leaned in closer, his breath hot and acrid. You're not just selling the dog, Cole, he whispered. You're selling your soul. Might as well get a good price. But the image of Lily Small, pale, fighting for breath in a hospital bed, bludgeoned every instinct of pride and self-preservation into silence. Victor stepped back, giving him space to choose. You do the job, Victor said, voice silk over steel, and you get twice this much, enough to get her the surgery, the rehab, a fresh start somewhere far from here. Ethan's vision blurred, rage and despair crashing against each other inside his skull. He looked at Rex, the dog who had saved his life more times than he could count. The dog who was now a pawn in a game Ethan didn't understand. Rex met his gaze, steady and unflinching, as if silently telling him, choose wisely. Ethan closed his eyes, his whole body shuddering with the decision he was about to make. When he opened them again, Victor was already smiling, as if he knew which way the scales would tip. Ethan stood frozen, Every muscle locked as Victor's smile lingered between them like a blade pressed against his throat. The metal case of money glinted dully at his feet, a physical embodiment of his damnation, and the leash dangling loosely from Victor's hand was like a noose tightening around his mind. Somewhere deep in the silence, Rex shifted his weight, a subtle reminder that trust once built in fire could still flicker even in darkness. Victor took a slow, deliberate step forward, lowering his voice into a near whisper, a conspiratorial hiss threading into Ethan's ear. "You know, you should have died that day," Victor said, and the words were so casual, so factual, that Ethan barely registered the enormity of them at first. Victor's gaze hardened, sharpening like a dagger. "Helmet, you remember it, don't you?" Ethan's jaw clenched. Of course he remembered. Helmand Province. Sandstorms so thick you could taste the grit between your teeth. Ambushes around every dune. The day when half his unit bled into the desert, and the sky turned a color Ethan could never erase from his dreams. He remembered the crumbling wall, the impossible angle of enemy fire, the bullet that should have ended him but didn't. Ethan said nothing, his throat a vice of memory and rage. Victor continued, savoring each word like a slow death sentence. "Had you in my sights, had my finger on the trigger. One squeeze, and you would have been another forgotten corpse rotting under the Afghan sun." Ethan forced himself to breathe, forced the heat building in his chest not to erupt into something violent and stupid. "Why didn't you?" he ground out. Victor's smile shifted, no longer slug, but something more raw, more dangerous. "Because you saved someone I loved," he said, and for the first time there was a tremor in his voice, a crack in the armor Ethan hadn't expected. Victor's eyes drifted to some point far beyond the alley, far beyond the present, to a memory too heavy to carry casually. "My brother," he said, voice low. "Luis Reyes, young, stupid, scared out of his mind. Your unit stumbled into an IED field. Most of you didn't even see it. But you," Victor pointed a gloved finger at Ethan, accusation and gratitude tangled together. "You dragged him out. You saved him." Ethan blinked, the memory rising like a corpse from deep water. A boy with wide, terrified eyes, blood streaming down his leg. The desperate scramble across sand that exploded into fire at every wrong step. Ethan hadn't known his name then, hadn't cared. It was just another kid, another life to salvage from the meat grinder. "He lived," Ethan said numbly. Victor's face shuddered. For a while, the two words dropped like stones between them. After the ambush, he was never the same. PTSD, nightmares, guilt. 2 years later, he put a bullet through his own skull. Ethan recoiled slightly, the weight of unintended consequences crashing down on him. He opened his mouth to say something, anything, but Victor cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Don't bother," Victor snarled, the rage now leaking fully into his voice. "You gave him a second chance. But the world chewed him up anyway. I don't blame you for that. Not exactly." The "not exactly" hung in the air like smoke. Victor paced a slow circle around Ethan, the predator sizing up wounded prey. "What I do blame you for," he said, voice dropping into a venomous growl, "is the mission that followed." Ethan's gut twisted. He knew exactly which mission Victor meant. Operation Iron Fist. A classified black ops so dirty even their own government pretended it never happened. Ethan had been point man, leading a strike on what Intel had insisted was a weapons cache. Only it hadn't been weapons they found. It had been families, women, children, civilians caught between lies spun by bureaucrats oceans away. The memory slammed into him screams blood, the helpless terror in the eyes of people who should never have been targets. Ethan remembered freezing, just for a second. Long enough for chaos to swallow the team whole. Victor stopped pacing and faced him squarely, the hatred in his eyes a wildfire barely contained. "Unit was ordered to support your breach," he hissed. "Your intel said clear, so we went in, and we died for it. 2 of my men wiped out in minutes. Friends? Brothers?" His voice cracked then, raw edges bleeding through the years of rage he had meticulously wrapped around himself. Ethan's heart pounded in his ears, every word slicing deeper into wounds he had never allowed to fully heal. "We trusted your intel," Victor said, shaking his head slowly like a man still trying to comprehend the betrayal. "We trusted you." Ethan's mouth was dry, the words he wanted to say withering before they could take root. It didn't matter that he hadn't written the orders. It didn't matter that he had been just another pawn moved by invisible hands. In the end, people had died. Good men. Because he said go, because he led the way. You think you're the only one who lost everything? Ethan finally rasped, his voice brittle. Victor's laugh was short and hollow. No, he said, but I was the one left to pick up the pieces. I buried them, Cole. One by one. Dug the graves with my own hands because there was no one else left to do it. You think you're so brave. Through it, you think you're so brave. The alley throbbed with thunder lightning. The alley held its breath. Ethan stared at Victor, seeing not just an enemy but a reflection of his own guilt, his own failure staring back at him. Victor leaned in, his face inches from Ethan's. You owe me, Cole, he whispered. You owe every man we buried in that cursed desert. Ethan's hands shook at his sides, the urge to lash out burning under his skin. But he forced himself to stay still. Victor straightened, his mask of cold calculation slipping back into place. You want to save your daughter, he said, voice smooth again, dangerous in its calm. You'll do exactly what I say. You'll pay your debt the only way that matters. Ethan said nothing, but inside something fragile cracked and splintered, the remnants of who he used to be crumbling under the weight of choices he hadn't even realized he made. Victor picked up the metal case, holding it out like an offering and a sentence. Take it, he said. Seal the deal. Ethan stared at the case, his heart hammering so loudly he could barely hear his own breathing. Somewhere, deep in the dark of the alley, something moved, watched, waited. Ethan's fingers hovered above the edge of the metal case, trembling not from fear but from the magnitude of what accepting it would mean. The air between him and Victor was thick, toxic with unspoken oaths and broken loyalties. A battlefield no less dangerous than the deserts they had once bled across. Victor watched him with a predatory patience, the corners of his mouth tightening in something that almost resembled sympathy but twisted too quickly into something colder. You think this is about money, Victor said, voice low and almost sorrowful. But it's never just about money. Ethan's throat was dry as ash, every fiber of his being recoiling from the invisible chains Victor was wrapping around him. Still, he forced himself to meet Victor's gaze head-on. The weight of every man he had lost, every sin he had buried, anchoring him to this terrible moment. Victor's smile flickered, amused by the defiance he saw but not deterred. He crouched beside Rex, running a hand through the thick fur at the back of the dog's neck. Rex stiffened, but didn't pull away, and that subtle betrayal struck Ethan harder than any punch. You know, Victor mused, if you walk away now, no hard feelings, you get nothing but, hey, at least your conscience stays clean, right? His hand tightened slightly in Rex's fur. Of course, Victor added almost casually. I'd have to find another buyer for this magnificent beast. There's always demand in certain circles. Ethan's fists clenched so tight that the tendons stood out in stark relief against his skin. What circles? He demanded, his voice a low, dangerous growl. Victor's smile widened, cruel and deliberate. There's a place about 80 miles south of here, he said, almost conversational. Underground training camp. Real nasty types. They love ex-canine. The image slammed into Ethan's mind with brutal clarity. Rex, forced into cages, pitted against other dogs or worse. His loyalty twisted into violence for the entertainment of men without souls. Ethan's stomach churned violently, a tide of nausea and fury rising inside him. You son of a bitch, he spat. Victor stood, brushing imaginary dust from his jacket with a casual flick of the wrist. Save the outrage, Cole, he said. You and I both know the world doesn't give a damn about good dogs or good men. It chews them up, grinds them down, only difference is whether you walk away with something to show for it. Ethan's vision tunneled, the edges of the world blurring as he struggled to hold on to the last frayed threads of reason. He couldn't let Rex fall into that hell. He wouldn't. Victor tilted his head slightly, sensing the shift, the crumbling of Ethan's resistance. There's only one way this ends well for you, he said, his tone dropping to something almost paternal. You get your money, you get your daughter's life back, and maybe, just maybe, you get to keep a sliver of your soul intact. Ethan's voice came out rough, each word dragging across razor wire. What's the job? Victor's eyes gleamed, a shark scenting blood. Simple, he said, savoring the moment. You're going to break into a decommissioned military base. Ethan's heart lurched, instinct screaming warnings he couldn't afford to heed. Why? He asked, knowing the answer would be worse than anything he could imagine. Victor's smile thinned into something deadly. There's a vault in the lower levels, he said, buried under tons of concrete and bureaucracy. It holds, let's call it insurance. Ethan narrowed his eyes. What kind of insurance? Victor chuckled. The kind governments kill to keep buried. Top secret data. Black Ops files, names, dates, evidence. He took a step closer, lowering his voice to a whisper that slithered into Ethan's bones. The kind of thing that, in the wrong hands, could bring down a lot of very powerful people. Ethan's stomach twisted tighter. And you want me to get it for you? He said flatly. Victor shrugged, all faux innocence. You're the perfect choice. Former soldier, familiar with protocols. No one's watching you anymore. You're a ghost, Cole, the perfect thief. He wanted to tell Victor to go to hell. He wanted to walk away. But Lily's face rose unbidden in his mind, pale and frail in that hospital bed. And with it came the crushing realization that he had no choice. Security? He asked, the word tasting bitter. Victor smiled approvingly, as if rewarding a particularly clever student. Minimal, he said. It's decommissioned, remember? Only a skeleton crew left. Older guards, skeleton shifts, piece of cake for a man like you. Ethan wasn't fooled. If it was so easy, Victor wouldn't need him. But he said nothing. The silence between them heavier than gunfire. One night, Victor said, holding up a single finger. One job. In, out. Bring me the data drive from the main server room. You'll know it, it's marked with a black phoenix. Ethan forced himself to nod, even as every instinct screamed that he was walking straight into a nightmare. Victor reached down, unfastened Rex's leash, and handed it back to Ethan with exaggerated ceremony. He stays with you until the job's done, Victor said. Insurance that you won't get any bright ideas about running. Ethan accepted the leash, the familiar weight of it grounding him for a moment in a reality that felt increasingly surreal. Rex pressed against his leg, a warm, steady presence that anchored him even as the ground shifted treacherously beneath his feet. Victor picked up the case of money and shoved it into Ethan's chest. Half now, he said. Half when you deliver. Ethan grunted, securing the case under his arm, feeling like he was carrying a ticking bomb. If I refuse? He asked, one last spark of rebellion flickering in his chest. Victor's smile vanished, replaced by something cold and merciless. Then I sell the dog, he said, his voice a death knell. And Lily, well, she won't live long enough to know what you sacrificed. Ethan stared at him, hatred boiling just beneath the thin veneer of control he clung to by sheer force of will. Finally, he nodded once, curt. Victor's expression softened into something almost triumphant. Good boy, he murmured, the words twisting like a knife between Ethan's ribs. We leave at dawn. Be ready. The first sliver of dawn peeled back the darkness, casting a thin, sickly light over the abandoned outskirts where the decommissioned military base loomed like a relic from another life. Ethan crouched behind the remains of a toppled fence, the battered metal cold against his back as he surveyed the crumbling perimeter wall. Victor knelt a few feet away, assembling a compact breaching kit with the casual ease of a man unpacking a picnic. The plan was simple, at least on paper. Slip through a forgotten maintenance tunnel beneath the motor pool, navigate past the skeleton crew of aging night guards, reach the server room in the West Wing and extract the data drive marked with a black phoenix. Simple, clean, and a goddamn lie. Ethan adjusted the leash around his wrist, feeling Rex pressed close to his thigh, warm and steady. The dog's presence gave him a grim kind of courage, even as his instincts howled that they were walking into a setup. Rex had been too quiet since Victor's threats, as if sensing the peril coiling tighter around them. Ethan reached down, ruffling the thick fur behind Rex's ears, grounding himself in the simple, brutal loyalty that had never once failed him. Victor clicked the final piece of the breaching kit into place and straightened with a grunt. 2 minutes to breach, he muttered, not bothering to glance at Ethan. Ethan gave a tight nod, adjusting the black tactical pack slung over his shoulder. Every fiber of him screamed to find another way, any other way, but time was a luxury he no longer possessed. They moved like shadows across the forgotten yard, slipping between rusted-out trucks and collapsing sheds. At the base of the old motor pool, Victor pried open a rusted grate, revealing a narrow shaft plunging into darkness. Ethan didn't hesitate. He dropped into the shaft, boots landing with a muted thud on concrete soaked with decades of condensation. Rex followed instantly, his nails clicking lightly before silence swallowed them both. The tunnel stank of mold and abandonment, a perfect artery for smuggling secrets that should have stayed buried. They moved in silence, Ethan leading, Victor ghosting behind. Every echo of their breath sounded like a gunshot in the confined space. 15 minutes later, they reached a steel service door marked Maintenance, authorized personnel only, its faded lettering barely visible under the grime. Victor produced a magnetic keycard with a smirk and swiped it through the reader. The lock clicked open with a soft whine. Ethan slipped through first, Rex at his heel, senses stretched to breaking. They entered a dimly lit corridor, the flickering fluorescent lights casting jittery shadows that made every corner a potential ambush. Ethan checked the route Victor had memorized. 2 left turns, 1 stairwell down, a final right, then the server room. Easy if no one noticed them. They made it past the first junction without incident, slipping between broken security cameras and slumbering guard posts. At the second turn, Rex suddenly halted, muscles tensing under Ethan's hand. A low growl rumbled in the dog's throat, almost inaudible. Ethan froze, his hand instinctively resting on the grip of his sidearm. From the darkness ahead, faint footsteps echoed, too heavy, too deliberate. A patrol. Victor grabbed Ethan's sleeve, yanking him into a disused storage room. They pressed against the peeling walls as 2 guards ambled past, oblivious, discussing baseball scores and overtime shifts. Ethan held his breath until their voices faded. Rex remained still, every muscle coiled tight, ready to spring. They waited another beat before slipping back into the hallway, moving faster now, down the stairwell, into another corridor lined with peeling posters and emergency exit signs so faded they were barely legible. Victor checked the map scrawled on his palm with a pen. Server room just ahead, he whispered. Ethan nodded grimly, ignoring the cold sweat slicking his spine. They reached a heavy reinforced door, a keypad blinking sleepily beside it. Victor produced another device from his pack, a compact codebreaker, and attached it to the keypad. The screen flickered, numbers racing. 30 seconds, Victor muttered. Time stretched thin, each second dragging like a lifetime. Rex whined softly, tail rigid, ears perked forward. Something was wrong. Ethan tightened his grip on the leash, muscles vibrating with tension. The lock beeped once, and the door slid open with a hiss. The server room beyond was a tomb of forgotten technology, rows of dusty servers blinking weakly in the dim emergency lights. And there, in the center console, marked unmistakably with the emblem of a black phoenix, was the drive they had come for. Victor surged forward, practically vibrating with anticipation. But Ethan held back, scanning the room with narrowed eyes. Something gnawed at the edge of his mind. Too easy, too perfect. He approached the console cautiously, Rex glued to his side. As Victor pried open the casing and extracted the drive, Ethan's eyes caught the label stamped along the console's base unit: Stacey. Classified. His breath hitched. Midnight Vow. The name ripped open old scars buried under years of willful forgetting. Midnight Vow wasn't just another black op. It was the operation, the ghost he had spent years trying to outrun. His hands shook as he brushed away more dust, revealing another line beneath the operation name: Tier 1 Personnel Files Incident. Court-martial summaries. Ethan's pulse roared in his ears as he realized what Victor was really after. This wasn't about corporate sabotage. This wasn't about government secrets. It was about them. About him. Ethan's name would be buried somewhere in those files, alongside the names of every soldier who had taken part in atrocities they were ordered to forget. The cover-ups, the massacres, the missions that had turned proud men into ghosts. Victor turned, the data drive clutched tightly in his gloved hand, a triumphant glint in his eyes. Got it, he said. But Ethan wasn't listening. His world had narrowed to a single point of terrible clarity. This wasn't about survival anymore. It was about erasure, about leverage, about revenge. Ethan's chest tightened as Victor slipped the data drive into an inner pocket of his tactical jacket, the edges of the server room seeming to close in on him, the whir of ancient cooling fans drowning out rational thought. Midnight vow. The words pulsed in his mind like a festering wound reopening under the force of memory he had fought so hard to bury. He took a staggering step backward, Rex pressing anxiously against his thigh, sensing the tremors racing through his handler's body. Victor arched an eyebrow, his expression curdling into something between mockery and pity. "Starting to remember?" he asked softly, the words knifing under Ethan's skin. Ethan opened his mouth to reply, but no words came out. Only a ragged breath as the horrors of that mission flooded back with merciless clarity. It had been a village, a nowhere place with mud huts and desperate eyes, the kind of target that shouldn't have existed on any map worth respecting. They had been told it was a weapons cache. Insurgents hiding amongst civilians, they said. Standard sweep and clear. Trust the intel, move fast. No time for questions. Ethan had led the charge, Rex by his side, boots kicking up clouds of dust that tasted like old bones and regret. When the first shots rang out, it was instinct, not thought, that drove them forward, clearing structures, neutralizing threats. Only there hadn't been any insurgents. Only wide-eyed children clutching at their mothers. Only old men scrambling to raise their hands in surrender a second too late. The screaming had been the worst, not from gunfire wounds or blood loss. Screams of terror, of lives ending in the blink of an eye, under the weight of orders given by men who would never see the consequences. Ethan had frozen when he realized, the rifle slipping from his grasp, his knees giving out in the dust and chaos. He remembered Rex barking frantically, trying to drag him to cover, trying to save him from the battlefield Ethan had turned into a graveyard. Ethan squeezed his eyes shut, but the memories only sharpened, cutting deeper, the faces of the dead rising like smoke from the ashes of his conscience. Victor's voice broke through, quiet but inexorable. "You didn't just follow orders that day, Cole. You made choices." Ethan snapped his head up, a flash of rage sparking through the numbness. "We were lied to," he growled, the sound raw and desperate. "We didn't know." Victor shrugged with maddening indifference. "Doesn't change the outcome, does it?" He took a step closer, his shadow swallowing Ethan's boots, his words slicing deeper with every syllable. "You killed them, Ethan. Mothers, children, elders. Wiped them out because some asshole in a suit drew a line on a map." Ethan staggered back another step, bumping into a battered file cabinet, the impact jarring but welcome, grounding him in the physical world before his mind slipped too deep into the abyss. "You think I don't live with it?" Ethan rasped. "Every night, every damn second, I hear them, I see them." Victor's expression hardened, the flicker of pity extinguished as quickly as it had come. "Good," he said. "You should." For a long, searing moment, they stood locked in that suffocating room. Two men bound not by loyalty or hatred, but by the indelible stain of shared sins. Ethan's gaze dropped to Rex, whose eyes, bright and unwavering, stared up at him with a trust so absolute it made his chest ache. Rex had been there. Rex had seen. Yet Rex had never judged. Never flinched, never left, unlike Ethan himself. Victor's voice softened, turning almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. "You know why I bought the dog, don't you?" Ethan shook his head stiffly, dreading the answer even as he needed to hear it. Victor smiled sadly, almost like a man offering absolution and condemnation in the same breath. "Not for money," he said. "Not for leverage. I bought him because he's the last part of you that's still clean." Ethan flinched as if struck. Victor's words landed harder than fists, harder than bullets. "I needed you to see it," Victor continued, inexorable now. A storm that had been gathering for years and could no longer be denied. "I needed you to remember who you were, who you let yourself become." Ethan's knees nearly buckled under the weight of the truth pressing down on him. Every rationalization, every excuse he had told himself for years crumbled to dust. Midnight vow hadn't been an aberration. It had been a revelation. And he had spent every day since then pretending he was still the man he had been before it happened. But Victor wouldn't let him forget. Wouldn't let him forget. Isn't just evidence against some faceless politicians or nameless officers. It's a mirror. It shows exactly who we are, what we've done. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a rasp that grated against Ethan's battered soul. "And now you get to decide what you're going to do about it." Ethan's breathing hitched, shallow and broken. He felt like a marionette with half its strings cut, barely able to stand, barely able to comprehend the enormity of the crossroads before him. He had thought he was here to save Lily. He hadn't realized until now that he was also fighting to save whatever was left of himself. The clink of metal snapped his attention back into the present. Victor had unclipped the drive from his jacket and held it out, offering it like a poisoned chalice. "Take it," he said. "Finish what you started." Ethan stared at the drive, the weight of 1,000 dead eyes pressing against his chest. Somewhere behind him, Rex gave a low, uncertain whine, the sound slicing through the fog of guilt and memory with a purity that Ethan didn't deserve, but needed more than oxygen. Slowly, with hands that no longer felt like his own, Ethan reached out. Ethan's fingers brushed the cool metal of the data drive, but the moment they made contact, Victor's hand shot out, grabbing Ethan's wrists with surprising strength, his voice dropping into a low growl that reverberated through the empty server room. "Not so fast," Victor said, his grip tightening enough to send a jolt of pain shooting up Ethan's arm. Ethan jerked free, stepping back, instinctively placing his body between Rex and Victor's heart hammering against his rim. "Now," Ethan hissed, already knowing it wasn't going to be anything he wanted to hear. Victor tilted his head, a thin, cold smile creeping across his face. "Insurance," he said smoothly. "You didn't think I just let you walk out of here, did you?" Ethan narrowed his eyes, muscles coiling, ready to move, to strike if necessary, but Victor raised a hand lazily, as if he could read Ethan's mind. "I've rigged the perimeter," Victor said almost casually, like he was discussing the weather. "Mine's old school, enough to turn you and your precious dog into mist if you take a wrong step." Ethan's blood froze. He glanced instinctively toward Rex, who stood rigid, nose twitching, picking up scents and vibrations Ethan couldn't even perceive. Victor chuckled, the sound dry and humorless. "I control the detonator," he said, patting his chest where a small black box undoubtedly rested. "You get a choice, Cole. Either you deliver the drive to me at the extraction point and walk away with your kid's future, or you play hero, go off and smoke." Ethic's fists clenched so hard his nails dug into his palms, drawing blood. Every nerve in his body screamed to attack, to end this now, but he knew Victor had planned for that. The mines weren't just deterrents, they were cages, invisible walls boxing Ethan in, forcing his hand without ever pulling a trigger. Victor stepped back toward the doorway, retreating into the dim hallway beyond, his parting words slicing the air. "You have 10 minutes, he said, before the charges arm automatically. Better make up your mind fast." Then he was gone, swallowed by the shadows, leaving Ethan alone with Rex and a nightmare rapidly closing in. Ethan turned to Rex, who stood stiff and alert, ears perked, body quivering with tension. "Find," Ethan whispered, the single command falling from his lips like a prayer. Rex needed no further prompting. His nose dropped to the ground, sniffing intently, moving in a slow, methodical pattern. Ethan followed, heart in his throat, watching every muscle in Rex's body for signs of danger. They moved through the server room, Rex leading the way, weaving between the dusty rows of outdated hardware. Halfway across the room, Rex froze, paw lifted, tail straight as an arrow. A soft, almost inaudible whine escaped his throat. Ethan's gut twisted. He knelt beside Rex, scanning the floor, and spotted it. A small, almost invisible wire stretched across the threshold leading into a trigger, exactly the kind of simple, brutal trap Victor loved. One wrong step and the whole wing would collapse in a storm of fire and twisted steel. Ethan's mouth went dry. He couldn't see the mines, couldn't trace all the lines, but Rex could smell them, sense them. It was the only advantage they had left. "Good boy," Ethan breathed, stroking Rex's head briefly before pulling back. Time was bleeding away. Every second, another heartbeat closer to annihilation. He couldn't carry both Rex and the drive if it came to that. He would have to choose. The thought gutted him, leaving a hollow ache in its wake. Ahead, past the network of deadly wires and triggers, a sliver of light beckoned the exit. The extraction point Victor had marked: freedom, salvation, or so Victor wanted him to believe. Rex whined again, nudging Ethan's leg urgently, then darted forward, veering away from the marked path, toward the side where the walls crumbled into deeper shadows. Ethan hesitated for a fraction of a second, torn between the planned route and the silent plea in Rex's body language. "Trust." Trust the dog who had never once let him down. Ethan followed. They moved quickly but carefully, navigating the maze of tripwires and pressure plates that Victor had hidden with ruthless precision. Sweat trickled down Ethan's spine, his breathing shallow, muscles aching from the strain of controlled movements. They reached an old maintenance access door hanging off its hinges. Rex nosed it aside, revealing a narrow crawl space that led toward the eastern wing, the part of the base supposedly abandoned years before. Ethan hesitated, every instinct screaming that this was suicide, but then Rex barked a sharp, urgent sound that shattered the silence. Without thinking, Ethan dropped to his hands and knees and crawled after him. The tunnel smelled of rust and mold, each breath thick with dust and fear. They emerged into a storage room cluttered with broken crates and obsolete machinery. And there, lying awkwardly against the far wall, was another mine. This one is different. Bigger, sloppier, rushed. Victor's failsafe. Ethan cursed under his breath, recognizing the signs. Victor hadn't just trapped the server room, he had wired the entire sector, betting Ethan would be too desperate, too cornered to notice. Rex crept forward, sniffing intently around the device. Then Ethan saw it. The thin red wire barely visible in the low light, leading not to the mine itself but to a secondary charge embedded in the wall. A backup system. If one charge failed, the second would ensure total destruction. Ethan's mind raced, calculating risks and possibilities. He could try to disarm it, but the timing was razor thin, the margin for error non-existent. Another choice? Another impossible decision: save the drive, which could expose the rot that had poisoned everything he had once believed in. Or save Rex, the only soul who had never abandoned him, never judged him, never stopped believing in him even when Ethan no longer believed in himself. Rex whined again, pressing his body against Ethan's side as if feeling the conflict tearing him apart. Ethan closed his eyes for a heartbeat, feeling the gravity of the moment crushing down. Then he opened them, his decision clear, burning through the fog of guilt and fear. Ethan's muscles burned as he scooped Rex into his arms, the dog whimpering against his chest, a faint tremor running through his battered frame. Every instinct screamed at Ethan to run, but training overruled panic, forcing each step to be measured, deliberate, avoiding the mines Victor had littered like death traps across the base. They burst out through a service door into the open air, the first breath of unfiltered dawn slicing into Ethan's lungs like broken glass. He didn't stop to savor it. There was no time. Across the cracked tarmac, hidden behind a stack of abandoned cargo containers, sat the old rusted van he had hotwired earlier that night, their escape plan, their lifeline to the hospital where Lily clung to life. Ethan's boots pounded the ground, Rex tucked tightly against him, heart hammering a frantic rhythm of survival. He reached the van, yanked the sliding door open and gently placed Rex onto the worn seat. The dog whined, trying to rise, but Ethan pressed a steadying hand to his side. "Stay, boy, stay," Ethan panted, voice rough with exhaustion and adrenaline. He slammed the door shut and sprinted around to the driver's side, fumbling the keys into the ignition. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life with a reluctant shudder. Relief swelled in Ethan's chest, sharp and fleeting. They had made it. They had survived. Then Rex barked, a sharp, desperate bark that sliced through Ethan's momentary relief like a blade. Ethan froze, one hand still on the gear shift. His gut twisted. He turned, scanning the dashboard, the floorboards, the seats. At first he saw nothing, but then, tucked beneath the dashboard where the shadows clung thickest, he spotted a thin black box with a blinking red light. His blood ran cold. A bomb. Rigged with a timer already ticking down, the numbers glaring at him in steady, merciless rhythm. 213, panic clawed at his throat. His hands hovered uselessly over the device, every ounce of bomb disposal training from his service days rushing back in disjointed fragments. None of it enough. This wasn't a military-grade explosive. It was homemade, savage, unpredictable. One wrong move and he, Rex, and any chance of saving Lily would be scattered across the desert. Ethan grabbed his radio, the battered device crackling to life. "Victor," he barked into the mic, voice sharp with fear and fury. "You bastard, you planted a bomb?" Static hissed for a heartbeat, then Victor's voice slithered through the speaker, calm and maddeningly smug. "Insurance, Cole, you disappoint me, you die. Clean and simple." Ethan gritted his teeth so hard he tasted blood. You want the drive, fine, but you're gonna help me disarm this damn— Silence stretched long enough that Ethan thought Victor might have walked away, might have decided that Ethan's life and Lily's weren't worth the risk. Then Victor sighed, the sound heavy with exasperated amusement. You really are stubborn to the end, he muttered. All right, but there's a price. Ethan's fingers twitched against the steering wheel, the timer bleeding precious seconds into oblivion. Name it. Victor's voice sharpened, slicing through the static. You walk into a military courtroom. You tell them everything. Midnight vow, the civilians, the cover-up. You give them names, you give them dates. You give them— Ethan's stomach twisted violently, nausea rising like bile. Confessing would mean the end of everything, no more hiding, no more running, stripped of whatever shreds of dignity or honor he had left. Court-martialed, imprisoned, branded a traitor by the very people he had bled to protect. But the alternative was unthinkable. Lily would grow up never knowing her father had fought for her, had fought to be more than the monster warrior had tried to make him. And Rex, loyal, unbreakable Rex, would die alone in a ball of fire because Ethan hadn't been strong enough to choose right over easy. Ethan pressed his forehead against the steering wheel, every muscle in his body quivering with the effort of not shattering under the weight of it all. Fine, he ground out, the word nearly choking him. I'll do it. Victor chuckled, low and dark. Smart man, now listen carefully. Ethan's fingers danced over the wires as Victor barked out instructions. Each move more nerve-shredding than the last. Cut the yellow wire, but only after grounding the red. Clip the battery feed, but not before isolating the secondary trigger. Sweat poured down Ethan's face, stinging his eyes, blurring his vision. His heart pounded so loudly he could barely hear Victor's voice over it. 047. The timer froze. For a long, terrible moment, Ethan didn't move, didn't breathe. Rex whined softly, nudging Ethan's arm, and the world snapped back into brutal, brilliant focus. They were alive. Barely. Ethan slumped back against the seat, muscles trembling with the aftermath of adrenaline. Through the windshield, the sun was rising over the desert, painting the world in bloody hues of orange and red. A new day, a reckoning. Victor's voice crackled one final time through the radio. Don't be late, soldier, he said, almost cheerfully. The court's waiting. Ethan dropped the radio onto the floor, staring out at the endless stretch of highway ahead. He had made his choice. Now he would live with it or die by it. Slowly, grimly, he put the van into gear. Rex curled up beside him, the drive burning a hole in his pocket, and the ruins of his past waiting just beyond the horizon. The courthouse loomed before Ethan like a relic of judgment itself, its stone facade bathed in the harsh midday sun, the flags hanging limp against a cloudless sky. Ethan adjusted the collar of the stiff, borrowed uniform they had given him for the hearing, the fabric scratching against his skin as if it too wanted to reject him. His boots echoed hollowly against the marble steps as he climbed, each step heavier than the last, carrying not just his own guilt but the silent weight of 1,000 ghosts. Rex padded quietly beside him, freshly bandaged but walking without a limp, eyes sharp and alert, sensing the tension radiating off his handler in waves. Inside, the courtroom smelled of polish and history, the benches filled with officers in dress uniforms, their faces carved from stone, unreadable, implacable. At the center of it all sat the military tribunal, 3 high-hanging officers, men whose medals spoke of lifetimes of service, judgment etched into the lines of their faces. Ethan stood at attention as the charges were read aloud, each word slicing another strip from what little pride remained. Dereliction of duty, violation of rules of engagement, conduct unbecoming. The list went on, a litany of failures that painted him not as a hero, but as a relic of shame. When the time came to speak, Ethan stepped forward, the data drive clutched in his calloused hands like an offering, and confessed. He told them everything. Midnight vow, the lies, the deaths, his own complicity whether by action or inaction. He laid himself bare before the tribunal, holding nothing back, not seeking redemption, only truth. His voice never wavered, even as his heart fractured anew with each admission. The room was silent when he finished, the kind of silence that could crush a man if he let it. One of the judges, a stern woman with silver hair and steel-gray eyes, leaned forward, steepling her fingers. You understand the consequences of your admission, she asked. Ethan nodded once, sharply. I do, ma'am. She studied him for a long moment, her gaze dissecting him in ways no bullet ever could. Then she spoke, her voice clear and merciless. You are hereby stripped of all honors, all commendations, all ranks previously held. Your record will reflect dishonorable conduct. Do you understand? Ethan swallowed the bitterness rising in his throat and nodded again. Stripped of everything. Exactly as it should be. For a heartbeat he swayed, the enormity of it nearly toppling him. But then a new voice spoke softly, unfamiliar, one of the prosecutors. A civilian liaison brought in for over. Your Honor, she said, rising to her feet. Given Mr. Cole's cooperation, the critical intelligence he has provided, and the unique circumstances surrounding his actions, the prosecution moves for a special conditional pardon, allowing him immediate release to pursue urgent personal matters. A murmur swept through the courtroom like a sudden wind. The judge raised an eyebrow, her expression unreadable. State your justification, she commanded. The prosecutor took a breath. His daughter, Your Honor, critically ill. Without immediate medical intervention, she will die. He is her only guardian. Silence fell again, heavier now, suffocating. Ethan stood frozen, the world tilting sickeningly around him. A full pardon was impossible, he knew, but clemency, however slight, was more mercy than he deserved. The judges conferred in low voices, the murmuring too soft to catch. Finally, the presiding officer turned back to Ethan, her expression grave. She said slowly, and with the acknowledgement that this tribunal finds your service marred by unforgivable actions, you are hereby granted a temporary conditional release to seek necessary medical care for your dependent. You will report back for final sentencing within 90 days. Ethan's legs nearly buckled, relief crashing into him with the force of a bomb blast. 90 days. 90 days to save his daughter, to buy her the life he had so often failed to protect. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, a sudden commotion rippled through the back of the courtroom. Rex, somehow in the confusion, the leash had slipped free. The dog bolted forward, weaving through stunned soldiers and clerks, nails clicking sharply against the polished floor. Ethan's heart stopped as Rex sprinted straight for him, ignoring shouted commands, ignoring protocol, driven by a singular, unwavering purpose. Rex skidded to a halt at Ethan's feet, sat down sharply, and raised his paw, placing it squarely on Ethan's booted foot. The courtroom gasped, the sound sharp and collective. For a moment, no one moved, no one spoke. Then one of the officers, a grizzled Marine colonel with deep scars running down the side of his face, rose slowly from his bench. His voice, when it came, was thick with something that sounded almost like awe. In canine protocol, he said, addressing the room, that gesture signifies ultimate loyalty, unbreakable bond, recognition of a leader worthy of following to death and beyond. His words hung in the air like sacred scripture. Ethan knelt slowly, hand trembling as he ruffled the fur between Rex's ears. The dog leaned into the touch, whimpering softly, as if sensing the tidal wave of emotion breaking loose inside Ethan's battered chest. Around them, the tribunal remained silent, the weight of the moment settling like a benediction over the ruined soldier and the loyal heart that refused to abandon him. When Ethan finally rose, Rex at his side, the judges did not call him back. They simply nodded once, solemnly, granting silent permission that transcended all words. Ethan walked out of the courtroom into the blazing sunlight, Rex limping but proud beside him, the data drive tucked safely away for another battle, another reckoning. Ahead lay a battered van and a future as uncertain as the desert wind. But for the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel hollow. Felt human. Broken, yes, but still fighting, still standing, and somewhere in a sterile hospital room bathed in cold fluorescent light. His daughter was waiting for him, a future waiting to be reclaimed, a debt waiting to be paid in full, not with blood or betrayal, but with the one thing Ethan Cole had left to give hope. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Every click supports the creation of more stories that matter. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Which moment in Ethan and Rex's journey struck you the hardest? And where are you watching from today? Drop a comment below. Your voice helps keep these stories alive